infrastructure. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yield back. Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion? Mr. Benz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to add in that the Russian gas, of course, is 30% dirtier than that which we are now producing. And but for that which we are producing, Europe would have been in enormous difficulty when Russia chose to cut off the supply. But the real issue here is the one that is constantly ignored, which amazes me, or it shouldn't because I've heard it so many times, is the failure to take into account scale. And these remarks about, well, let's just shut off fracking and somehow green energy will pick up the slack ignores the fact that 33% of our total energy is natural gas in the United States. Clean energy, so-called renewable energy, is 13%. So this is a classic case of saying, let's shut off the supply and then see what happens. And I'll tell you what will happen. The price goes through the roof, and the people most incapable of bearing these extra costs suffer. And you might have noticed, perhaps, a recent study that shows credit card debt today is greater than it has ever been. And that is because people are continuing to spend as though they were still receiving free money, as was the case a couple of years ago. Unfortunate, isn't it? But when they have to pay for fuel to get to work and they're busy paying higher costs on their credit cards, why would we do something to drive those costs up before we have an alternative? And so I just want to say, Mr. Chair, I of course support this bill, and I would recommend that those who are talking aggressively about doing away with fracking share with all of us how you're going to replace that 33%. Because you're not going to do it overnight. It's not going to, in fact, it's going to take years. And one other thing, it might be worthwhile to revisit the source of the rare earth minerals that are going to be necessary for this so-called clean power. Mr. Chair, it amazes me how blithely people pass over these super important parts of this conversation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? I recognize myself. And as has been mentioned, hydraulic fracking or fracturing has had a transformative impact on the U.S. economy and the oil and gas sector, which has allowed the United States to become the world's leading producer of natural gas and oil, which has had huge economic benefits to our country, and it's also produced oil that is, and gas that has been mentioned is cleaner than any place else that it's produced. It's a technology that's been around since 1947, but it's when American innovation came up with horizontal drilling is when fracking really came to the forefront and has created somewhat of a revolution in the fossil fuel industry here in the U.S. This increased production of oil and gas in the U.S. has led to lower energy prices for consumers. It's led to economic growth, and it's led to improved quality of life for Americans. And this is the same country that in the 1970s we thought was running out of oil and gas. Early concerns surrounding groundwater quality were put to rest by a study that was conducted by the Obama administration's Environmental Protection Agency in 2015 that found that fracking has had no, and I quote, widespread systemic impacts on drinking water resources in the United States, end quote. Despite this finding, fracking has been attacked by special interest groups that oppose American energy security. And I think this gets to the heart of the issue. And it's, if you look at fracking in a vacuum, if you look at fossil fuel production in a vacuum and you think carbon is bad for the planet, you would say we should stop fracking, we should stop producing all kinds of fossil fuel energy. But it's ignoring the fact that the world's demand and consumption of energy is continuing to go up at an exponential rate. So the oil and the gas is going to be produced somewhere, and as has been said, it's being filled in by countries like Venezuela, like Iran, like Russia. The countries that I don't think we want to see a lot of economic growth in those countries with the things that they're supporting around the world today. So why not produce it here produce it cleaner and safer, and create more national security for us and more security for neighbors and friends around the world. It's been attempted to stop hydraulic fracturing several times in the past. In fact, the Obama administration's BLM attempted to regulate fracking, a move that was ultimately struck down by a U.S. District Court. In the ruling, the court expressed that, I quote, "Regulation of an activity must be by congressional authority, not administrative fiat," end quote. And it went on to say, quote, "Congress has not delegated to the Department of Interior the authority to regulate hydraulic fracturing, and the BLM's effort to do so through the fracking rule is in excess of its statutory authority and contrary to law," end quote. And then on the campaign trail, candidate Joe Biden seemingly supported instituting a fracking ban when, in response to a question on whether he would allow fracking to continue, he said, quote, "No, we would work it out. We would make sure it's eliminated," end quote. After realizing that his stance was widely unpopular, Biden walked back his remarks by claiming that he only supported banning new oil and gas permitting on public lands and waters. H.R. 1121 would protect against future attacks like these on and support responsible American energy production by reasserting that the United States should maintain primacy for regulating hydraulic fracturing and prohibiting this administration or any future administrations from banning fracking without congressional approval. I ask my colleagues to support the legislation offered by Representative Duncan, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion?